Welcome to the Utilization of Money podcast with Todd Levine from Levine Financial Group. In this podcast, we teach our clients how to own their personal economy. Join us on this journey where we build upon your greatest asset as Todd draws from his years of expertise, solutions, strategies, and expert guest stories to help you understand how money works.
Hello and welcome to Utilization of Money with Todd Levine from Levine Financial Group. Today we are covering part 3 in a 3-part series, and that 3-part series is 401ks. Before we start, just kind of give the audience just kind of a recap of why you chose to do a 3-part series on 401ks and why these topics are so important.
We find that most people are fully engaged with a 401k or some sort of traditional retirement vehicle. It's introduced very early in the game, pretty much as soon as someone gets their first job right out of college. And, it's really outside of, their contract. Right next to it is their 401k contribution. So we feel that, this is something that we see when we start the planning process, that most people are coming in just assuming that that a plan should just be built around this one particular vehicle because it was always told to them that this is their primary retirement vehicle. So we really wanted to bring this out and really go narrow and deep on this so everybody listening can fully understand what they're getting involved in when this is presented to them, or in their existing plans that they have. Maybe it's time to take a deeper look and see where this vehicle is and how it's coordinated with their overall financial plan.
Yeah, and you said something in one of the previous podcasts that really stuck with me. And for those that are listening to part 3, and this is the first podcast you've heard from Todd, go back and listen to those other 2, and also obviously all the other podcasts, because you really get to know Todd and his team. But one thing that you said is that a 401k isn't so much a retirement savings vehicle as more of a forced savings plan. And I thought, man, that's absolutely right because of the things that you've covered. So I just thought that was really important to mention again. As we get into today's podcast, I know that you've got a couple other areas to cover, so I'm just going to let you get to it.
Sure. Yeah, as we were wrapping up the last podcast, there was a couple other areas that we wanted to talk about and what we consider to be, well, there's certainly positives to it, but there's also negatives to it. The first one is the employer match. So a lot of people go into these retirement plans excited about the idea of creating a forced savings for retirement. And they're excited about the idea of their employer actually contributing to their plan outside of them. And one of the things that we want everybody to know is that, number one, this is not guaranteed. Okay, it's changed throughout the over time. I remember in the 90s, it was extremely popular that companies were giving 100% matches up to the full maximum contribution. That's very rare now. And a lot of times you'll see 100% contribution up to 3% or 6%, or it's scaled. And so we have to understand that this is not always going to happen, and that the employer can actually change this at any point in time. They can match 100% up to 6% one year, but the next year, maybe they want to change the structure, or their company's not performing really well. So they decide to take away the match. And, so we find that's a challenge. And if that's going to be one of the areas that's going to entice you to put money into these vehicles, that you just need to be aware about what that looks like and how it changes. And also understand that, as we talked about in the previous podcast, is that there are tax liabilities, on these traditional plans that are embedded. So, with the employer actually matching outside of you, it's really it's like almost counterproductive, because whereas it's helping you to increase your savings objective, it's also increasing your tax liability outside of it. And a lot of people don't look at that as well. And to go a little bit deeper, in regards to these type of plans is there are actually a lot of plans out there that don't offer matches. I think some of the ones that we come across that very rarely match are 403Bs. So when we look at that, we look at a 403B and we see that the internal fees are rather high and that there's no match. And we start looking at the idea that there's no liquidity in these over a long period of time. And that is this really the best place to be putting our hard-earned cash flow. So to us, this is something that we view as a positive, but also a negative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that for sure. And I did not know that companies can change after you've already signed up. I had no idea. So I wouldn't be even paying attention that closely, I think. I don't know what kind of announcement they need to make if they're going to take that match away. But man, I had no idea.
Yeah, it is something that is completely discretionary. Some years could be great, some years not. But that should not be the only reason why you're actually going to this plan. And then we also have plan discretionary in-service rollovers. So an in-service rollover is one where somebody who's actually still working with the company can actually elect to roll over the 401k to a qualified IRA or a qualified Roth IRA. Why would someone want to do this? Well, as we discussed earlier, is investment options, potentially being able to create a little bit more liquidity, through some areas that we cannot actually do while you're in an employer-sponsored plan. And so this is really all based on how the 401k is actually written with that particular employer. So there are some plans that allow it. And so what that means is there will be no tax liability. You can actually roll over a portion and or all of the money in that plan over to a qualified IRA to give yourself additional investment options if they're available. So to us, we love this idea because sometimes people feel that they're trapped in these plans once they start understanding all the somewhat negatives to it, and then they can't move it. It was interesting. We had a client who had run into some some hard times prior to sitting down with us, and the primary asset was the 401k plan, and he was completely locked out of it. So we really didn't have many options available to access that liquidity, as we talked about. So it was something where we were looking at all different options and potentially in-service rollover option to move the money over and then give us additional options on that money, potentially to give him a little bit of a bridge until he gets through this period of time. And unfortunately, it was not available. And I'll never forget this question. I mean, he was joking around when he said this, but he said it almost makes sense for me to ask my employer to lay me off just so I could get my money and then, get back. And it was obviously joking around. Is that something that we were taking seriously and or recommending? But it was just an interesting thing because here was this person's primary savings. He was in a jam, and we had very little options. The in-service rollover is a valid option, but not available all the time. So we view that as a bad. If in fact the client can roll it over at any point in time, we view it as a positive.
Understood. All right. So now let's move on.
Yep, absolutely. Well, the worst case scenario, we feel that when clients now have progressed through life, they've accumulated all their money, whatever assets they're going to have, and now it comes time to what we feel is the most important period of their life, which is the distribution phase. So now they're really not so focused on the amount of money that they've created. They're more focused on the lifestyle and the income. And as you can imagine, a lot of people get into retirement and a 401k or 403b or some sort of qualified investment vehicle is their primary asset. And some of the things that we see presents problems. And so we feel that it was really important to stress this. So the first one was require minimum distributions. So a lot of people don't understand what a require minimum distribution is, or they say RMD. So an RMD is basically says that you're going to be required to take distributions from your retirement plan at a minimum at 70.5. So if in fact you don't take any money, then you will be penalized up to 50% of the income, based on how much you should have been taken in that particular year. So that's a heavy penalty. So now, no matter what,
a huge penalty.
Huge penalty. And a lot of people don't realize this. So they're getting advice from their accountants to defer. What's interesting, well, they've been deferring their whole life, and now it's time to take income. So now here we are in retirement. They might be spending some other assets or living on Social Security or have any sort of other maybe defined benefit plans or other incomes that are coming in. And they're a little bit reluctant to touch the 401k because they don't want to be taxed. You're going to have to start taking income or you're going to be heavily penalized. Okay. Now, another thing about the RMDs, what a lot of people don't realize is once they start taking this income from the 401k is that the required minimum distributions rise every single year. So now when you look at this and you're like, okay, so I'm in retirement. I don't really want to take a lot of risk. I want to be able to preserve my assets and be able to live my life. The challenge is that it's not easy to earn a rate of return when you're not taking any sort of, you have no correlation to the equity markets. So you're going to have some sort of correlation to the equity markets to achieve what we call safe withdrawal rate, which is at a minimum 4%. So the RMDs start in the high threes, and then they're going to start working their way up over time. And once you get into your mid 80s and 90s, hopefully, is that required minimum distribution starts to head up into the high sevens and even the eights, depending on how long you live. So if you think about it, if in fact you're managing your assets appropriately in the most conservative way, because you don't want to lose it in the market, but the required minimum distributions continue to rise, what's going to naturally happen to your asset? It's going to start to deplete. And this is really only one issue with this, because leading in, so now you have the required minimum distributions that you're being forced to take that are rising, but you're kind of managing the assets on the other side. So you're trying to preserve the assets and really sort of just make sure that, you know, you're not really dipping into this money any more than you should, because what's going to happen is eventually that money is going to deplete. Now, heading over into, talking about, let's kind of stay on RMDs and what are some other things to look at here. So if you're forced to take required minimum distributions and they're going up every single year, that presents one challenge because we have to appropriately manage the assets. So no matter what, the assets are going to deplete. And just want to make this clear that the reason why the government created required minimum distributions is so they can get their tax dollars.
Yeah, they want
they're
money.
They're going to get the tax dollars no matter what. They're going to get it. They would like to have it collected all in your lifetime, but if not, then it's going to be passed down and inherited and become an inherited IRA, and there's going to be inherited IRA distributions. So either way, the IRS is gonna get their money. So now, when they're forcing you to take these RMDs, we also have to think about something called what we call sequence of returns risk. So sequence of returns risk is interesting because now here that really just tells us that, well, we have to manage the assets appropriately. So it's almost like a snowball effect. So now here we are, we're managing the asset, right? And we're not trying to be too risky. We're maybe in a 60-40, somewhat moderate conservative portfolio to try to achieve that safe withdrawal rate of 4%. But the RMDs are slowly going higher than 4%. But now all of a sudden, we have a year that's not up we have a year that's down. So what happens early on is that if in fact early on in distribution, let's just say right when you start taking distributions, you have to take your close to 4%, but the market is down 5%. Now, what happens? So that's what we call a bad sequence. So it's interesting. So we can factually show our clients that in the first 3 years, if we have any sort of bad sequence with rising required minimum distributions, the client will run out of money in year 11, 12, or 13. But in a perfect management setting where we have no bad sequence on the front end of those distributions, it's interesting because most likely the money will last. There might not be much left at the end of the day because the rising requirement of distributions are eroding that, but you won't run out of money in year 12 or 13. So as you can see now, people are heading into retirement and they're like, oh, wow, I have this money in my 401k, but they're completely unaware of all the things that can happen because, they just don't understand. There's like, well, they just thought they could start taking income and all's going to be great. Now, just want to add one more thing to that sequence of returns risk and rising required minimum distributions and all that stuff. So this is just assuming, Eric, that we're just taking required minimum distributions. So what's interesting is that when people have this, what we call one-legged stool type of plan where all the income is really just being generated from this one vehicle, they don't really have many options. So they're starting to self-insure a little bit. And what that means is that, so they have all these things that are going on in their life. They have to worry about potentially getting sick or maybe helping their kids with a wedding or grandchildren or traveling or whatever the case may be. So they find themselves in this situation where because of all these risks that are now brought to their attention, they find themselves in a place where they're self-insuring. So that means that they want to live on a little bit less just in case we have a bad sequence, just in case, they need to take extra money for something along the way. And the problem is that most people, they get into retirement, but they don't really want to live that way. So now if we're fighting we're fighting sequence of returns risk, we're fighting market risk, we're fighting rising required minimum distributions, and then you just so happen to take an extra 20 or 30,000 because you want to travel around the world. How is that going to really affect the longevity of your plan? So as you can see here, there's a lot to discuss.
Every person that's listening to this, your situation is different. That's why it's so important to have this conversation and sit down with a professional. If you've got one, reach out and talk to them. If not, I know that Todd and his team Todd, I'll ask you for your number at the end of the podcast, but I know that you guys are ready to talk to people about this. Sure. What else do we need to cover?
One of the things about 401k plans and these retirement vehicles that are not what the classic defined benefit plans is that they're not guaranteed. And so one of the questions I ask in our meetings is this: what sources of guaranteed income do you have in your existing plan? So what do you think is the first thing everybody says?
My 401k.
My 401k.
Yeah.
Right. So I want to ask them, well, what's guaranteed about the 401k plan?
Well, the money that's in there, I'm going to pull it
guaranteed?
out. Yeah, I'm going to pull it out when I retire. So I have a monthly income, Todd. That's how I think it works.
Exactly. So it doesn't have lifetime benefits like a traditional defined benefit plan. Mm-hmm. And we have all these forces going against us in regards to the government and the IRS and the market conditions. So we know and we understand that this is not a guaranteed vehicle and it cannot be viewed like that. And this kind of leads to why we start talking about other areas to where we can potentially reallocate and move monies to create different guaranteed income sources and protect against these rising required minimum distributions. This way we can actually let some of these assets breathe a little bit and then coordinate them with other vehicles to then provide for more lifestyle, protect against some of those things that we're self-insuring against in regards to, health risks or long-term care. I said health risks, long-term care, or even just being, able to utilize your money to give back to your children while you're alive.
Todd, you said that, we touched on, being able to leave kids money and so on and so forth. And you also spoke about earlier, and I'd heard it said before that, RMDs are because Uncle Sam wants his money, right? He's going to force you to take the money out so he can collect his taxes. And I've known that for quite some time, and I think a lot of people understand that. But when it comes to passing wealth to the next generation, I know that just through my own research and you and I chatting, that the tax law changes that came in 2019 to 2020 area, that did change some things as far as what your beneficiary is allowed to do, what people receiving your 401k or your retirement are allowed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we talk to our clients about transferring their wealth, we want to do it in the most tax efficient way. And unfortunately, with these retirement plans, there's no way around the tax liability. I think one way that we can reduce the tax liability over a long period of time is to actually spend it down. But I think for our clients to understand is, they might say, well, if I die, my daughter or son is going to get this, or my spouse. So regardless of this, I think one thing we have to understand is that there's no way around the tax. So if in fact you die and your 401k either transfers to your spouse, now the spouse would have more options than to defer this until their retirement age. But in regards to children, there's a lot of stipulations to how they're going to be able to, how and when they're going to be able to distribute this money. And it's all based on a periodic table of their age and time and et cetera. So but it's one thing to understand that, that you have to take it. And if you do not take it, you will get penalized. And we've had a lot of, over the years, we've had so many people come in who've had inherited IRAs that they were not taking distributions from. So it's really, really important to understand that from a planning standpoint, that this vehicle should be coordinated with other more tax favorable vehicles to be able to alleviate some of these tax liabilities, but there's no way around it. In fact, if in fact you do find yourself with an inherited IRA, that you should definitely seek out a professional to help you organize it and figure out what are your best options.
Yeah, man, that's scary. I mean, I'll just be honest, that's scary. I would be in those shoes sitting here thinking, I haven't touched my inheritance. I'm doing really good, right? I'm surviving. I'm thriving. My family's doing well on my income or the other things that I have. So I'm just going to let that inheritance sit and grow, right? That there's so many factors that people just don't understand. And I think that's why it's a good thing for somebody to have a professional that's on their side that can be there in the moment. And then also, and I know you and your team do this, Todd, that you can also check back in a month, check back in 2 months. Hey, how are you doing? How are things going? Let's check and see how everything's doing with the transfer, with what's going on, how that's going to impact your future and the accounts that you have. Now that the emotion has kind of died down a little bit and the whirlwind of planning a funeral and everything else that possibly was part of that is done, I know that you guys walk alongside your clients. So for those that are listening that would like to talk to you about this, or maybe they've gotten an inheritance the last couple of years and like, wait a second, I need to figure this out, see if there's something I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not doing currently. How do they reach out to you and your team, Todd?
Yeah, so I mean, we could be reached at 732. We're in Colts Neck, New Jersey, so we could be reached at 732-526-2922. Or you could email us at office@levinefinancial.net.
And I want to make very clear, you don't just work in New Jersey. You're licensed in many states, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So we have virtual office, and so we have clients all around the country. Our main office location is in Colts Neck. That's where our staff is. But we service clients all around the country.
Yep. And this podcast is nationwide. So if you're listening to this in a state other than New Jersey, don't be shy. Make the phone call. Talk to Todd. He'll have a meeting with you. He'd love to sit down with you, even if it's virtually, and go over kind of what you're looking at. And so to alleviate some of those fears and focus on the good. So that would be great. Todd, thank you so much. I think this was an incredible series. Very informative. I learned a ton, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it.
Hey, you bet. And thank you all for listening to the Utilization of Money podcast with Todd Levine. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Todd comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Levine Financial Group, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Utilization of Money podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.
Todd Levine, registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Security products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is an indirect, wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Levine Financial Group is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. Starting January 1st, 2020, the minimum distribution age was changed to 72. Arkansas Insurance License Number 15670742 and California Insurance License Number 0H01258. 2019-91302, expiration 12 of 21.